The airport hummed with the chaotic energy of travelers. Claire, with her tailored coat and perfectly set hair, exuded confidence, hiding a core hardened by years of silent prejudice. She glanced up as the boarding announcement crackled over the speakers. Just ahead, Daniel waited in line, his warm smile and relaxed demeanor catching her attention for all the wrong reasons. When the flight attendant gestured to her seat next to Daniel, Claire's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. "Excuse me, is there another seat available?" she demanded. A few passengers nearby shifted, uncomfortable. Daniel's eyes met hers, reading the unspoken insult. He nodded with understanding, stepping aside to allow her to pass. "I can change seats if that helps," Daniel offered softly. Claire hesitated, taken aback not by the offer itself, but by the way he said it, with kindness. And just like that, the story took off into a journey neither of them would ever forget. As the plane taxied down the runway, Claire sat stiffly, arms crossed, eyes averted. The weight of judgment hung between her and Daniel like a thick fog. Daniel, on the other hand, was unfazed, glancing out the window with a serene expression. The gentle hum of the engines filled the silence. Half an hour into the flight attendant approached Claire with an unexpected surprise, a cup of tea and a small card. Puzzled, Claire frowned, picking up the card. In elegant handwriting, it read, "A warm drink to make the journey easier. Your fellow passenger, Daniel." Claire's eyes widened, and a flush crept up her neck. This small, thoughtful act rattled her. How could he be kind, despite her cold reception? Her fingers gripped the armrest, betraying her inner conflict. She glanced sideways, catching a glimpse of Daniel speaking to a young boy across the aisle, a bright smile lighting up his face. His genuine nature chipped away at the walls she had built. Time passed, but Claire's mind buzzed with discomfort. The tea sat untouched, as if it were a symbol of her own stubborn pride. Meanwhile, Daniel's presence continued to draw the attention of others. He struck up conversations with passengers around him, sharing stories of his work at a nonprofit that provided scholarships for underprivileged students. Passengers leaned in, eyes wide with interest. Claire felt a pang of curiosity despite herself. She had always thought people like him used charm for show, yet he seemed different, authentic. Each laugh he shared, each kind word, cut through her preconceived notions, forcing her to question herself. The flight continued with a steady rhythm until turbulence struck. The sudden jolt sent a collective gasp through the cabin. Claire's heart raced as she clutched the seat, panic seeping into her chest. Amid the chaos, a reassuring voice reached her ears. "Are you okay?" Daniel's voice was calm, an anchor in the storm. Claire managed a curt nod, refusing to meet his gaze, but in that moment, fear mixed with something she hadn't felt in years, vulnerability. The walls she had fortified cracked ever so slightly. As the turbulence passed, Daniel leaned back, leaving Claire alone with her thoughts. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, noting how he had extended kindness without hesitation. Why did it matter so much to him? A tiny seed of doubt sprouted within her, a question she couldn't shake. What if I've been wrong all along? With the plane stable again, Claire's mind wandered to her past. Memories surfaced. Childhood afternoons with her strict father who often spoke in bitter tones about those people and warned her against trusting anyone outside their circle. His words had molded her beliefs, hardening her heart. But Claire's mother had been different. She was gentle, offering kindness to everyone regardless of background. Claire pushed that memory away, choosing instead to believe that life had shown her father was right. Yet, here she was, challenged by a simple, persistent kindness that mirrored her mother's way. The atmosphere on the plane slowly shifted as Daniel's actions rippled outward. Passengers who initially avoided eye contact or kept to themselves were now engaging with each other. A young mother across the aisle received help from a stranger when her toddler dropped a toy. An elderly man, initially silent, started sharing stories of his youth with a college student beside him. Claire watched these interactions unfold, feeling both detached and strangely drawn in. It was as if Daniel's presence was weaving an invisible thread of humanity through the cabin. His subtle influence planted seeds of kindness in even the most unsuspecting places. Despite herself, Claire's defenses wavered. Suddenly, Daniel's voice broke through her reverie. He had started speaking about the work that brought him joy, mentoring young people, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, to help them break the cycle of poverty. His eyes shone with passion as he described how a simple opportunity could change someone's future. "Why do you care so much?" someone behind Claire asked, voicing the question she had been struggling with. Daniel's answer was simple, yet powerful. "Because I know what it feels like to be overlooked, judged without reason. But I also know how it feels when one person decides to believe in you and show kindness." The flight continued smoothly until an unexpected announcement came over the speaker, a medical emergency at the back of the plane. A passenger had fainted, and the crew scrambled for assistance. Instinctively, Daniel rose from his seat and moved swiftly to help, his calm demeanor steadying those around him. Claire's pulse quickened as she watched him, a mix of guilt and awe settling in her chest. The man she had dismissed, the one she refused to sit next to, was now the one taking charge and comforting others in a crisis. When the situation calmed down and the passenger regained consciousness, applause broke out. Claire found herself clapping, though her hands trembled. In that moment, her barriers started to crumble. The layers of prejudice she had carried for so long felt heavier, harder to justify. Claire's mind churned, each memory of past biases now challenged by the man before her. The next time Daniel walked by to return to his seat, their eyes met. This time, instead of looking away, she held his gaze. There was an unspoken understanding in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that change was happening. Gathering her courage, Claire spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for earlier, and for the tea." Daniel's smile was genuine, devoid of judgment. "You're welcome." A warmth spread through Claire that she hadn't felt in years. It was as if the act of speaking those words had released a burden she didn't know she was carrying. As the plane began its descent, the cabin was filled with a sense of camaraderie. Passengers exchanged smiles, conversations picked up, and Claire felt something shift inside her. When the plane finally touched down and the announcement to disembark was made, Claire took a deep breath. This was her moment. Before Daniel could move, she stood and turned to face him. "I misjudged you, and for that, I'm sorry," she said, her voice firm but soft. Gasps and murmurs followed as nearby passengers witnessed the exchange. Daniel's eyes held a glimmer of surprise before they softened. "Thank you. That means a lot." Tears pricked Claire's eyes, but they were tears of release, an acknowledgement of the shift that had taken place within her. Once off the plane, Claire found herself standing in the terminal, watching as Daniel walked away. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the card he had given her. The handwritten words spoke louder now, "A warm drink to make the journey easier." It wasn't just about the tea. It was about the journey she had taken, not only in miles but in understanding. She felt compelled to share her experience to tell others that kindness, when given, could change even the hardest hearts. Claire called her closest friend and told her about the man on the plane and what he had taught her without knowing it. The final note to the audience was clear. Kindness isn't just an act. It's a catalyst for transformation, one that can ripple outward and change lives. Days after the flight, Claire found herself reflecting on the encounter more than she expected. The simple act of kindness had triggered a series of questions about her beliefs, choices, and the kind of person she wanted to be. It was as though a light had been switched on, illuminating parts of herself she had ignored for years. She reached out to an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years, someone she had distanced herself from over a disagreement that seemed trivial now. The friend's surprised but warm response further fueled Claire's determination to change. One afternoon, Claire walked into a community center that offered volunteer opportunities. The faces that greeted her were diverse: young, old, people from different walks of life. She signed up to mentor children who struggled with the same issues Daniel had spoken about on the plane. It was her first real step toward breaking down the walls she had so tightly built. Several weeks later, Claire attended an event at the community center for volunteers and families. It was a lively gathering filled with laughter and stories. She felt an unfamiliar sense of belonging that both comforted and challenged her. Suddenly, a familiar voice caught her ear. "Claire, I didn't expect to see you here." Turning around, she saw Daniel, looking just as composed and kind as on that plane. He was surrounded by children who clung to his every word, their eyes wide with admiration. Claire felt a rush of embarrassment followed by gratitude. "I didn't expect to be here either," she admitted, a small smile breaking across her face. "But your kindness, it made me rethink a lot of things." Daniel nodded, his smile warm. "Kindness has a way of doing that." Their conversation was interrupted by the laughter of a young girl tugging at Daniel's sleeve. He turned his attention back to her, leaving Claire to watch the scene unfold. It was then that she realized the true power of kindness. It didn't just touch one life, it spread, transforming one person after another. The community center became Claire's second home. She grew close to the children she mentored, seeing in them the hope and potential that Daniel had once spoken about. Each small act of kindness she shared was met with smiles, laughter, and the realization that change was possible, even for someone like her. Claire's journey was far from over, but for the first time she felt that it was headed in the right direction. Her outlook on the world was no longer confined to the narrow beliefs she once held. It was open, filled with possibilities, and driven by the desire to make a difference. One day, as Claire watched the children play, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. It was Daniel, holding a piece of paper. "I thought you might like this," he said, handing it to her. It was a photograph taken at the event, showing Claire laughing with the children, her smile as genuine as ever. "I wanted you to have a reminder of what kindness can do," Daniel said. Tears filled Claire's eyes as she looked at the photo. It was more than just a picture. It was a testament to her transformation. She hugged the photograph to her chest, feeling a wave of peace wash over her. Claire's newfound openness didn't just change her relationships with strangers. It affected her personal life, too. One evening, she picked up the phone and called her younger brother, whom she hadn't spoken to in years after a heated argument. The line rang longer than expected, and she almost hung up before hearing his familiar voice. "Claire, is everything okay?" he asked, a mix of surprise and concern. A lump formed in her throat. "Yes, everything is okay. I just wanted to talk. It's been too long." They spoke for hours, revisiting childhood memories, laughing at inside jokes, and rediscovering the bond that had once seemed lost. Claire realized that changing her heart toward one stranger had opened her up to healing wounds she'd ignored for too long. Daniel and Claire's paths continued to cross at the community center. One afternoon, as they sat side by side watching the children work on an art project, Claire turned to him. "Do you ever think about how one moment can change everything?" Daniel nodded, eyes thoughtful. "All the time. Kindness is like that. You never know how far it will go." Claire smiled, looking at the kids with new eyes. "I was so closed off before. It's strange to think that it took one flight to make me see things differently." Daniel chuckled. "Sometimes the smallest acts bring the biggest changes." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a boy share his crayons with a girl who had run out. Claire felt the warmth of hope spread through her, grateful that life had given her the chance to change. Despite the progress Claire had made, there were days when doubt and guilt resurfaced. One evening, as she flipped through an old photo album, she came across a picture of her father. His stern face reminded her of the years of influence that had shaped her early beliefs. Anger, mixed with sadness, twisted in her chest. Claire took a deep breath and reached for her phone. She called her mother, who now lived in a quiet town a few hours away. "Mom, can I come visit you this weekend?" she asked. Her mother's voice, gentle as ever, held surprise. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love that." When she arrived, Claire felt the weight of memories pressing down on her. They talked about everything from childhood stories to current events, skirting around the heavier topics. Finally, Claire spoke. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about Dad and the way he shaped our beliefs. Her mother's eyes, lined with age and wisdom, filled with understanding. Your father did what he thought was right, but we're allowed to grow beyond the past, Claire. A tear slipped down Claire's cheek. I think I'm finally starting to, Dutty. The next time Claire visited the community center, she brought a special guest, her mother. The older woman's eyes sparkled as she watched Claire interact with the children. It was a side of her daughter she hadn't seen in years, and it made her heart swell with pride. Daniel, noticing the visitor, walked over. You must be Claire's mother, he said warmly, extending his hand. She took it with a smile. I've heard a lot about you. Thank you for inspiring her. Daniel glanced at Claire, who was helping a child tie his shoelaces, and nodded. Sometimes, it's the simplest things that make the biggest impact. The three of them spent the afternoon together, laughter and shared stories echoing through the room. Claire felt the last of her old walls crumble as she embraced this new chapter of her life. Months passed, and Claire's life continued to bloom in unexpected ways. She organized events at the community center, fostering unity among people who once walked their paths alone. She became known for her warm smile, an irony that didn't escape her. She, who once sat cold and distant, now opened her heart without hesitation. At one such event, Daniel approached Claire with a small package. I thought this would suit you, he said, handing it over. Claire opened it to find a bracelet made of simple beads. Each bead had a word carved into it. Hope, kindness, growth. She slipped it onto her wrist, the meaning settling deep into her heart. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. No, Daniel said, eyes kind. Thank you for proving that people can change. As time went on, Claire felt an urge to share her journey, not just to inspire others, but to solidify her transformation. She was invited to speak at a community event titled Stories of Change, where people from different backgrounds shared how acts of kindness had changed their lives. Standing on the small stage, Claire's palms were damp and her heart raced. She glanced at Daniel, who sat among the audience, giving her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, she began. I once boarded a flight, burdened by beliefs that separated me from the world around me. I refused to sit next to a man simply because he was different from me. But what I didn't expect was that this man would teach me the most profound lesson of my life, that kindness holds the power to break barriers we don't even know we've built. A hush fell over the room as Claire recounted the flight and the transformation that followed. Faces in the crowd reflected understanding, curiosity, and empathy. By the time she finished, applause thundered through the room. Claire felt a weight lift from her, replaced by a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. Afterward, people approached her, sharing their own experiences and thanking her for her honesty. Daniel stood at a distance, a proud smile on his face as he watched Claire's story spark a new wave of connections among strangers. Inspired by her speech, Claire and Daniel collaborated to start a project called Bridges of Kindness. The initiative aimed to connect people from different walks of life, encouraging conversations, shared experiences, and acts of compassion. The community center became a hub for workshops, storytelling sessions, and outreach programs. One evening, a young woman approached Claire after a session. I never thought people could change, she said, eyes glistening with emotion. Hearing your story made me realize it's possible. Thank you. Claire's chest swelled with emotion. Change is always possible when we let it in, she replied, squeezing the woman's hand. One afternoon, while Claire was busy organizing an event, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see an old friend from her college days, Emma, who she hadn't seen since they parted ways due to differences in beliefs. Emma! Claire's surprise quickly turned to joy. Emma's expression was tentative but hopeful. I heard about what you're doing here, and I had to see it for myself. I'm proud of you. The two women hugged, years of distance melting away in an instant. Claire realized that her journey was not just about changing her own heart, but also about mending old relationships and building new ones on a foundation of empathy and understanding. As bridges of kindness grew, stories of transformation and hope began to spread beyond their community. The initiative was featured in local news, and soon people from neighboring towns came to participate. The ripple effect of Claire and Daniel's work reached further than either of them could have imagined. One day, Claire received a letter in the mail. It was from a passenger who had been on that flight months ago. The letter read, "Dear Claire, I don't know if you remember me, but I was sitting a few rows behind you on that fateful flight. Watching the transformation in you inspired me to confront my own biases and extend kindness to those I had distanced myself from. Thank you for being brave enough to change and for inspiring me to do the same." Claire's eyes filled with tears as she read the words. The proof of her impact gave her the motivation to continue pushing forward, spreading kindness wherever she could. Years later, at the annual Bridges of Kindness Gala, Claire stood on stage once more. The room was filled with people who had become part of the movement, families, volunteers, and strangers who had found common ground. She looked out at the crowd, her heart full. Daniel stepped up beside her, a small smile on his face. "It's amazing, isn't it? How one moment can change everything." Claire nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. "It truly is." As they spoke, laughter and conversation hummed around them. Claire realized that kindness had done more than change her. It had given her a new life, full of connection, purpose, and hope. And as she took in the faces around her, she knew that the journey of transformation never truly ended. It continued, carried forward by each person willing to embrace it and pass it on. As the years passed, Bridges of Kindness continued to expand, reaching communities that had long been divided by misunderstandings and distrust. With the growth, however, came new challenges. Claire found herself dealing with logistical issues, funding shortfalls, and moments of doubt about whether they could sustain the momentum. One afternoon, Claire sat at her desk staring at the piles of paperwork and unanswered emails. The pressure was mounting, and for the first time in years, she felt the old fear creeping back, the fear of failure. Just as the anxiety began to take hold, a knock at her office door broke her thoughts. Daniel stepped in, his calm presence instantly soothing. "You look like you could use a break," he said, handing her a cup of tea, reminiscent of their first meeting on the plane. Claire smiled, the simple gesture reminding her of why she had started this journey. "Thank you," she whispered, taking a sip. Daniel sat across from her, leaning forward. "We always knew this wouldn't be easy, but remember the impact we've made is worth every challenge." Claire nodded, the weight on her shoulders easing slightly. "I needed that reminder. It's easy to forget why we do this when things get tough." Motivated by Daniel's words, Claire pushed through the challenges with a renewed sense of purpose. She reached out to local businesses and philanthropic organizations, advocating for the importance of community support and shared responsibility. Slowly but surely, partnerships formed, and funding began to stabilize. One evening, during a volunteer appreciation event, a young man approached Claire. "I don't think I'd be here without Bridges of Kindness," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "I grew up in a neighborhood where hope was hard to come by, but this place changed that for me." Claire's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. She realized that every late night, every moment of doubt, was worth it. The work she and Daniel had started was no longer just theirs, it belonged to everyone whose life it had touched. As Bridges of Kindness matured, a new generation of leaders began to emerge. Young adults who had grown up attending the center's programs returned to mentor others, carrying forward the spirit of empathy and connection. Claire often marveled at how the cycle of kindness continued, fueled by the seeds she and Daniel had planted years ago. One of these new leaders, a young woman named Maria, stood out. Maria had once been a shy teenager with little confidence, but now she spoke with poise and passion. Claire watched her lead a workshop one afternoon, seeing in Maria the embodiment of everything they had hoped to achieve. After the session, Maria approached Claire with a smile. "I can't thank you enough for believing in this place and in people like me. You changed my life." Claire reached out, taking Maria's hands in hers. "It was always in you. We just helped you find it." One day, while Claire was preparing for an upcoming event, she received a message from an old acquaintance, Emma. They had kept in touch, but this time Emma had news. "I've invited someone special to the event. I think you'll be surprised," the message read. Curious, Claire waited at the event with anticipation. As the crowd gathered and conversations hummed, she finally saw Emma walk in, accompanied by an elderly man. Claire's breath caught in her throat when she recognized him, Mr. Andrews, her father's old friend who had once shared her father's views. Emma guided him to Claire. He looked frailer than she remembered, but his eyes were clear and searching. "Claire," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "I came to see for myself what you've done. I wanted to understand." Claire felt a mix of surprise, apprehension, and hope. "I'm glad you're here," she said sincerely. The two spoke for hours that day, sharing memories, regrets, and moments of realization. By the end of the evening, Mr. Andrews stood before the crowd and spoke words that resonated through the hall. "I once believed in keeping barriers up, but seeing this, what kindness can achieve, I understand now that breaking those barriers down is where true strength lies." Claire's journey had come full circle. She stood at the community center, looking out over the crowd that had gathered for their largest event yet. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, former strangers now bound by shared stories of hope, understanding, and compassion. Daniel stood beside her, the two exchanging a knowing glance. Claire reached for the bracelet she still wore, the one he had given her long ago, its beads worn smooth with time. It reminded her that while one act of kindness had started this journey, it was the many that followed that built a legacy. As the evening ended, Claire took the stage one last time, her voice steady and full of emotion. What started as a moment of discomfort on a plane became a lifetime of learning and growing. And it is my greatest hope that every person here will carry that same lesson forward, to see beyond differences, to choose kindness, and to keep building bridges wherever they go. The crowd erupted into applause, but Claire's eyes found Daniel's. He nodded, a proud smile on his face. The story of transformation wasn't just hers. It was theirs, shared by every soul who chose to believe in the power of kindness. After the successful event, Claire found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each eager to share their story of how bridges of kindness had touched their lives. The joy in the room was palpable, but amidst the celebration, Claire felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had joined her on this journey. Later that evening, as the center quieted down, Daniel and Claire sat side by side in the empty hall, watching the last of the guests trickle out. The soft glow of the fairy lights strung around the room gave the space a warm, serene ambiance. "Do you ever think about how different life would have been if that flight had never happened?" Claire asked, a wistful smile playing on her lips. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "I think about it all the time. Life has a funny way of bringing people together when they need it most." Claire nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle into her heart. It's strange, isn't it? How one uncomfortable moment can lead to a lifetime of purpose. As the years rolled on, Bridges of Kindness became more than just a community center. It became a movement. Cities across the country adopted similar programs, inspired by the stories that emerged from Claire and Daniel's work. Young leaders like Maria took up the torch, spreading the message far beyond what they had imagined. Claire watched from the sidelines as a new generation led with passion and creativity. The faces of those who once came seeking hope now stood at the forefront, making a difference in their own communities. It was a beautiful cycle. Kindness begetting kindness, transformation feeding transformation. One day, as she prepared to step back from her active role, Maria approached her with a heartfelt request. "Claire, would you share your story at the next national conference? People need to hear it from you." Claire hesitated, the thought of public speaking still sparking a touch of anxiety. But then she looked into Maria's eyes and saw the same hope and determination that had once driven her. "I'd be honored," she finally said. The national conference was held in a grand hall, filled with attendees from across the country. Claire stood backstage, listening to the hum of conversation that filled the space. She glanced at the photograph Daniel had given her years ago, now worn at the edges but cherished more than ever. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights dimmed and the room fell silent. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the sea of faces before her. "Years ago, I was someone who didn't understand the power of kindness," she began. "But one unexpected encounter on a flight changed everything." As she spoke, Claire shared not just her story, but the stories of those who had been touched by bridges of kindness. She recounted the challenges, the breakthroughs, and the lessons learned along the way. The audience listened intently, some nodding, others wiping away tears. Toward the end of her speech, Claire's voice grew steady and resolute. "Kindness is not just a fleeting moment. It's a choice we make every day. It's the decision to look past our fears, our prejudices, and to reach out, even when it's uncomfortable. That's what I learned, and it's what I hope everyone here will carry forward." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing in the hall and in Claire's heart. As she stepped back, Daniel, now a beloved figure in the movement, met her with a smile and a hug. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," Claire replied, eyes glistening. "We did it." After the conference, Claire spent time reconnecting with attendees who shared their stories of transformation. Each story was a testament to the idea that kindness had no boundaries and that its reach was limitless. The movement had taken on a life of its own, powered by those willing to embrace change and inspire it in others. One evening, back in her quiet home, Claire sat by her window, watching the sunset cast warm hues over the city. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find an elderly woman standing there, holding a familiar piece of paper, the note Daniel had written all those years ago. "I was on that flight," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I kept this as a reminder of the day I witnessed kindness change someone's heart. I thought you might want to see it again." Claire took the note, tears filling her eyes as she read the simple words once more. "A warm drink to make the journey easier." It was a poignant reminder that the journey wasn't just hers. It was one shared by everyone who had chosen to believe in the power of compassion. As Claire watched the sun dip below the horizon, she realized that while her active role in Bridges of Kindness might shift, the work would never truly end. It would continue in the stories told, the lives touched, and the hands extended in kindness across generations. The story of the woman who once refused to sit next to a man on a plane had become more than just an anecdote. It had become a symbol of hope, change, and the enduring power of empathy. And as Claire sat back, a contented smile on her face, she knew that the seeds of kindness she and Daniel had planted would continue to grow, carried forward by those who understood that even the smallest acts could leave the deepest marks. One morning, while Claire was tidying up her home, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from someone she hadn't thought about in years. Alyssa, a childhood friend she had lost touch with after high school. The letter was brief, but powerful. "I heard about the work you're doing. I'd love to catch up. Maybe you can help me find my way back, too." Claire's heart leapt. She hadn't realized how far-reaching the effects of her journey were. She immediately wrote back, inviting Alyssa to visit and see the community center in person. When Alyssa arrived, Claire was struck by how familiar and yet changed her old friend looked. There was a weariness in her eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. They spent hours walking through the center, talking about old times and the paths their lives had taken. Alyssa shared her struggles, the loneliness she had faced, and the mistakes that had led her there. Claire listened, feeling a surge of empathy she wished she had known how to express years ago. "I want to find purpose again," Alyssa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire smiled, taking her friend's hand. "You've come to the right place. This is where it all starts." Alyssa began volunteering at Bridges of Kindness, finding comfort in helping others and rediscovering her sense of self. The work filled her days with meaning, and Claire watched as her friend's confidence grew. Alyssa started to share her own story with the people she met, encouraging those who felt lost to seek new beginnings. One day, as they sat together after a long day of activities, Alyssa turned to Claire. "Thank you for bringing me here. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again." Claire's eyes softened. "The journey isn't always easy, but it's worth it, and you're proof of that." Daniel, who had been quietly watching from across the room, joined them. "Every story of change starts with a moment of courage," he said, looking at Alyssa. "Yours is just beginning." The next big event at the center was an art exhibition titled Windows of the Soul, showcasing works created by volunteers and participants, each piece telling a unique story. Claire, Daniel, and Alyssa worked tirelessly to organize the event, transforming the community center into a gallery filled with paintings, sculptures, and photographs. During the opening night, people from various backgrounds and ages came to admire the art, sharing their interpretations and stories. One particular piece caught everyone's attention, a mural that depicted the scene of a plane flying through a storm with a rainbow emerging from behind it. Below, it read, "One moment, one choice can change everything." Claire stood in front of the mural, eyes welling with emotion. Alyssa walked up beside her and whispered, "That's your story, Claire, and now it's part of all of us." As word spread about the exhibition and the ongoing impact of Bridges of Kindness, recognition came from unexpected places. Claire was invited to speak at a national forum on community building, and the center received support from organizations that wanted to replicate its model in other regions. At the forum, Claire stood under bright lights, facing an audience that included leaders, activists, and people eager to make a difference. She spoke of the importance of seeing each other's humanity, of choosing empathy over judgment, and how kindness, even when difficult, could change the world. The forum concluded with a standing ovation, and Claire felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Afterward, Daniel met her backstage, eyes twinkling with pride. "You keep proving that change isn't just possible, it's unstoppable." Years later, Claire stood on the same stage where she had once told her story at the community center. Now, she was ready to step back and let the next wave of leaders take over. Maria, who had blossomed into an inspiring leader herself, stood by her side, ready to assume the role Claire had nurtured for so long. "Maria, this is your moment," Claire said, holding her mentee's hands. "Carry it forward and keep building those bridges." Maria nodded, her eyes glistening. "I will, Claire. Thank you for everything." The room was packed with familiar faces, old friends, and newcomers who had heard the stories of transformation and wanted to be part of the movement. As Claire looked around, she saw Alyssa leading a group in conversation, Daniel chatting with a young volunteer, and countless others whose lives had been touched by what had started on that flight so long ago. Retirement from her role didn't mean Claire's work was done. She continued to visit the center, now a beloved figure known to everyone as the woman whose life had changed in the sky. She watched with pride as Bridges of Kindness expanded to new cities, new countries, bringing people together under the universal truth that kindness was transformative. One day, as she walked through the center's familiar halls, she overheard a child asking their parent, "Why is everyone so kind here?" The parent smiled and replied, "Because a long time ago, someone learned that being kind was the best way to bring people together, and we're all following her example." Claire felt her heart swell with gratitude and peace. The impact of that one moment, that one choice, had rippled out in ways she could never have imagined. And as she sat by the window watching the sun set over the city, she knew that the story of kindness was far from over. It would continue, carried forward by each act of compassion and every person who chose to believe in it. One quiet afternoon, as Claire sat in her garden surrounded by blooming flowers and the gentle rustle of leaves, there was a knock at her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, so curiosity piqued as she stood up and walked to the door. When she opened it, she found a young man standing there, holding a small, worn notebook. "Hello, Miss Claire. My name is Michael," he said, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. "I don't know if you remember me, but I was the boy on the plane, the one Daniel was talking to." Claire's eyes widened, memories of that day flooding back. Michael had been just a child then, but now he was grown, with sharp eyes that held both youth and wisdom. "Michael, of course I remember," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "Come in." As they sat in the sun-dappled living room, Michael opened the notebook and placed it on the coffee table between them. "I've been writing for years, about that day, about what I learned from watching you and Daniel. I thought it was time to share it with you." Claire's heart swelled as she leafed through the pages. It was filled with stories, reflections, and observations that spoke of kindness and its impact on his life. Michael explained how seeing Daniel's kindness and Claire's transformation had inspired him to dedicate his life to advocating for compassion and understanding. "I work as a social worker now," he said, his voice steady and passionate. "And I tell people that the moment that changed me happened on a plane when I saw kindness turn into something powerful." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to place a hand on his. "Michael, this means more to me than you know. Thank you for sharing this with me." Michael's visit sparked an idea. Claire reached out to him a few days later and proposed they work on a new initiative, a youth mentorship program under Bridges of Kindness that would teach children and teenagers the value of empathy, resilience, and leadership. With Michael's energy and Claire's experience, the program took shape quickly. They designed workshops, storytelling sessions, and interactive activities that resonated with young minds. Daniel, still a mentor and friend, offered his support, often coming in to share his own stories and insights. Soon, the program became a beacon for families looking for ways to teach their children about acceptance and empathy. Parents brought their kids from far and wide, and the community center once again buzzed with the vibrant laughter and chatter of children. A year after the program's launch, they held their first graduation ceremony for the young participants. Claire stood at the podium, looking out at the rows of bright, eager faces. The parents sat behind them, some wiping away proud tears. Daniel stood to the side, a content smile on his face. Michael stepped up and addressed the crowd. "What we teach here isn't just kindness for today. It's kindness that will carry these children through life, shaping the choices they make and the people they become. I learned that firsthand from Claire and Daniel, and now we're all part of that legacy." Applause erupted, and Claire felt a warmth unlike any other. The seeds she had planted had grown into a vast forest of compassion, each tree standing tall and strong, ready to weather any storm. After the ceremony, a woman approached Claire with a shy smile. It was someone she hadn't seen in decades, her high school friend, Caroline. The years had added silver to her hair and lines to her face, but her eyes were just as bright. "I saw what you've been doing, and I had to come," Caroline said. "You were always kind, even back when we were young. I just wanted to tell you that you inspired me to reach out to people I had lost touch with, too." They shared stories late into the night, catching up on old times and sharing the changes life had brought. The conversation reminded Claire that the impact of kindness wasn't just in the grand gestures. It was in the small, quiet moments of reconnection and forgiveness. As the years passed, Claire watched Bridges of Kindness evolve. It became a symbol of hope not just in her community, but around the world. Stories of transformation from their programs were shared widely, inspiring other cities and countries to adopt similar approaches. One day, Claire received an invitation to speak at an international conference on peace and unity. It was an opportunity to share how a single act of kindness on a plane had rippled out to touch thousands of lives. Standing before a global audience, Claire told her story one last time, not just as a lesson, but as a call to continue building bridges wherever there were divides. She concluded, "Kindness is the most powerful tool we have. It's what makes us human, what connects us, and what drives real change. I hope that my story inspires you to take a moment, reach out, and be that change." The applause that followed wasn't just for Claire, but for every person who had chosen kindness and every life that had been touched by it. On a cool evening, years after stepping back from her active role, Claire sat on her porch, the setting sun casting golden hues across the landscape. The laughter of children playing in the distance carried on the breeze. She held a book in her lap, one written by Michael, filled with stories from the youth who had gone through the mentorship program. It was titled, Echoes of Kindness. Claire smiled, tracing the title with her fingers. She had found peace in knowing that the journey she had started would continue long after she was gone, and as she closed her eyes, she whispered, "Thank you, Daniel," knowing that without that single act of kindness, none of this would have been possible. The journey of one moment, one choice, continued to echo through generations, proving that kindness was indeed the most lasting legacy of all. One day, Claire received an envelope in the mail. The handwriting on the front was familiar, yet it had been years since she'd seen it. With a sense of anticipation, she opened the letter. It was from Daniel, who had moved to a neighboring city to help set up a new chapter of Bridges of Kindness. Dear Claire, I hope this letter finds you well. As I sit here watching new faces come together in the name of kindness, I'm reminded of our journey. Every time I share our story, I see the same spark ignite in others, the realization that they, too, can be part of something bigger. Thank you for being my friend, my inspiration, and a constant reminder that one moment can change everything. I hope we continue to see the ripples of what we started reach places we could never have imagined. With gratitude. Daniel. Claire read the letter twice, feeling an overwhelming sense of joy and nostalgia. She placed it carefully in a box where she kept other cherished memories, photos, notes, and small tokens that reminded her of how far they had come. The 25th anniversary of Bridges of Kindness was approaching, and the community center was abuzz with excitement. This milestone was a celebration not just of the center itself, but of the countless stories it held. Claire was asked to be the keynote speaker, a role she hadn't taken on in years. When the day arrived, the hall was filled with familiar and new faces alike. Banners adorned the walls, displaying words like hope, unity, and compassion. As Claire took the stage, she felt the weight of the years, not as a burden, but as a testament to the strength of the journey. I stand here today, humbled and grateful, she began, her voice steady. What started as a moment of discomfort became a lifetime of purpose. I've watched this center grow, not just as a building, but as a family that spans countries, generations, and beliefs. The audience was captivated, listening as Claire recounted the story of the flight and how that single act of kindness had changed everything. When she concluded, there was a moment of silence before the applause erupted, echoing through the hall and into her heart. After the anniversary celebration, Claire was approached by a young girl with bright eyes and a wide smile. "Miss Claire, I want to be like you when I grow up," she said with innocent determination. Claire knelt down, meeting the girl's gaze. "You already have everything you need to be a leader," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "All it takes is a heart willing to see others and be kind." The girl's mother, standing nearby, smiled. "You've inspired not just us, but our entire family," she said. "We're here today because we heard about what you and Daniel started." Claire's heart warmed, seeing the legacy of her work alive in the eyes of the young and hopeful. It was proof that kindness wasn't just a story, it was a way of life being passed down. As the evening wound down, Claire stood outside, watching the last rays of sunlight dip below the horizon. Daniel, who had attended the event and shared his own stories, walked up beside her. They stood in comfortable silence, the cool breeze wrapping around them. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Daniel said finally, his voice filled with quiet wonder. "What we started here has grown beyond anything we could have dreamed." Claire nodded, a smile touching her lips. "It reminds me that even in the simplest of moments, there's potential for greatness. That flight, it changed everything." Daniel chuckled softly. Who would have thought that refusing a seat could lead to all this? They both laughed, the sound light and full of life. It was a shared acknowledgement of the power of their story, of the way their paths had intertwined to create something beautiful. In the following years, Claire found joy in watching Bridges of Kindness expand beyond anything she had imagined. Schools began integrating kindness programs inspired by the center, and neighborhoods once divided by fear and misunderstanding found common ground in acts of compassion. One day, while visiting a newly opened center in a distant city, Claire noticed a mural painted on the side of the building. It depicted a vast ocean with countless ripples spreading outward, and in the corner were the words, "Kindness is the tide that lifts all boats." Tears pricked her eyes as she read the familiar sentiment. This was no longer just her story or Daniel's story. It belonged to everyone who chose to reach out, build bridges, and believe in the power of change. As Claire entered her late years, she continued to mentor and inspire. Young leaders often visited her for guidance, and her home was filled with letters from people around the world sharing their experiences with kindness. One evening, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and friends who had become family, Claire felt a deep sense of peace. The laughter and love that filled her home was a living reminder of the life she had built, one choice at a time. "Grandma, can you tell us the story of the plane again?" her youngest grandchild asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Claire smiled, looking around at the faces that meant everything to her. "Of course," she said, her voice warm and steady. "It all started with a seat on a plane and a choice that changed everything." As she began to tell the story once more, Claire knew that it would live on long after she was gone, carried forward by those who believed in the simple, enduring power of kindness. As the years continued to pass, Claire decided to compile everything she had learned into a book. It would be a reflection not only of her journey, but of all the people who had been touched by Bridges of Kindness. The book, titled A Flight to Kindness, One Choice, One Change, became a memoir filled with stories of transformation, lessons learned, and practical ways for people to make a difference in their own communities. The book gained traction, resonating with readers around the world. It became a guide for educators, leaders, and everyday people looking to foster empathy and kindness in their circles. Claire was humbled by the response, realizing that the reach of her story was now boundless. During a book signing event, a young man approached her with tears in his eyes. "Ms. Claire, your book gave me the courage to reconnect with my estranged father. We hadn't spoken in years, but your story showed me that change is possible." Claire's heart swelled with emotion as she held his hands. "I'm so proud of you for taking that step. That's what this is all about, finding the courage to be kind, even when it's hard." Claire was invited to speak at an international summit on social change. Leaders, influencers, and changemakers from all over the world gathered to discuss the power of human connection and empathy. Claire's keynote was eagerly anticipated, as her story had inspired countless initiatives. Standing on stage, Claire took a deep breath, looking out at the faces that represented every corner of the globe. "My story began with an act of prejudice," she started, "but it didn't end there. It became a story of transformation, compassion, and the realization that kindness is not just an act, but a way of life." She shared the journey from that pivotal flight to the founding of Bridges of Kindness and beyond. She spoke of the lives touched, the obstacles overcome, and the moments of doubt that had ultimately strengthened her resolve. By the time she finished, the room was silent, the audience captivated by the simplicity and power of her words. When the applause came, it was not just for her, but for every person who chose to see others through a lens of kindness and understanding. After the summit, Claire returned home with a newfound energy. The summit had opened doors for collaborations, and invitations poured in for Claire to visit new countries and help establish centers modeled after Bridges of Kindness. Even at her age, Claire was determined to keep contributing. On one such visit to a small town overseas, she met a group of young adults who had started their own community project inspired by her story. They called themselves the Ripple Makers, and used art, music, and storytelling to foster connections and bridge cultural divides. Claire spent days with them, sharing her insights and learning from their fresh, innovative approaches. She saw in them the spirit of the younger Claire, the curiosity, the hope, and the belief that change was possible. Before leaving, one of the founders, a young woman named Sophia, presented Claire with a handmade quilt. Each square represented a story of kindness, stitched together by people who had been part of their movement. "This is for you," Sophia said, "to remind you that what you started keeps growing, one stitch at a time." Claire hugged Sophia, tears in her eyes. The quilt was more than a gift. It was a testament to the life she had dedicated herself to and the countless souls who carried her legacy forward. Claire's final project was one that had been close to her heart for years. A children's book that told the story of the plane ride that changed everything. Illustrated beautifully, it depicted characters learning about kindness, forgiveness, and courage. She titled it, "A Seat by the Window," a nod to the fateful flight that had begun her transformation. The book became popular in schools, used as a tool to teach children about empathy and understanding. Claire visited classrooms to read to children, seeing their faces light up as they learned that small choices could make a big difference. It was a full-circle moment, watching young hearts absorb the same lesson she had learned all those years ago. In the twilight of her life, Claire's home was filled with mementos, photos, and letters from people who had been touched by her journey. On her 90th birthday, the community gathered to celebrate not just her life, but the movement she had created. Daniel, now an elder statesman in the kindness movement, stood by her side, his hair silver but his spirit unchanged. Speeches were made, stories shared, and a laughter filled the room. Michael, now a leader in his own right, presented a plaque that read, "To Claire, who taught us that one choice can change everything." Surrounded by her family, friends, and countless others who had been touched by her journey, Claire felt a deep, quiet joy. She knew that the work would continue, passed down to those who believed in the transformative power of kindness. As the evening came to a close, Claire sat with Daniel, watching the stars appear in the night sky. "We did it, didn't we?" she whispered. Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "We did, Claire, and so much more." In her final days, Claire was at peace, knowing her life had been spent building bridges, nurturing hope, and spreading kindness. Surrounded by loved ones, she passed away quietly, with a smile on her face and the quilt gifted by the Ripple Makers draped over her. Her funeral was not just a farewell, but a celebration of a life that had touched countless others. People from all over the world attended, each bringing their stories of how Claire's journey had changed them. Daniel, now frail but still full of warmth, gave the eulogy. "Claire taught us that kindness is more than just a moment, it's a legacy. And as we move forward, we carry her story with us, spreading it to every corner of the world." As they laid her to rest, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the gathering. It felt like a final nod from Claire herself, a reminder that even in the quietest moments, kindness could shine through and light the way. In the years following Claire's passing, Bridges of Kindness thrived under new leadership. Michael, now the director, expanded the initiative to include programs focusing on environmental stewardship and global collaboration. Maria, now a respected leader in her own right, continued to mentor young minds and advocate for inclusive education. Claire's book, A Flight to Kindness, became a timeless piece taught in schools and universities. Her children and grandchildren often attended events where they spoke about their grandmother's legacy, sharing anecdotes about how her lessons shaped their own lives. One day, during an international gathering of kindness organizations, Maria took the stage and addressed the audience. "Claire taught us that kindness is more than just a gesture. It's a movement. And that movement continues with each of us here today. Her story reminds us that even the simplest choices can ripple out to change the world." To honor Claire's memory and the global impact of Bridges of Kindness, the community decided to build a monument in the city square. The sculpture featured a pair of outstretched hands forming a bridge, symbolizing the connection between people. Inscribed at the base were the words, "One moment, one choice, endless ripples." At the unveiling ceremony, Daniel, now in his late 90s, was invited to cut the ribbon. His hands, though shaky, were steady with purpose. As the cloth fell away, revealing the monument, applause rang out and tears glistened in many eyes. It was a tribute not just to Claire, but to the countless lives she had touched. In his speech, Daniel spoke softly but with conviction. Claire believed that one act of kindness could change a life. Today, we see that she was right. This monument stands as a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small. Years passed, and a new generation grew up hearing stories about Claire and the beginnings of bridges of kindness. One of these was a young girl named Lila, whose mother had been one of the first children in the original mentorship program. Lila, inspired by the stories she heard from her family, dreamed of starting her own kindness project. At just 16, Lila founded Voices of Kindness, an online platform where people from around the world could share their stories, collaborate on community projects, and spread the message of compassion. The platform quickly gained traction, uniting people who believed in Claire's vision of a world connected by empathy. During her first interview, Lila spoke proudly about her inspiration. "I may not have known Claire personally, but I feel her presence in every story I read and every act of kindness I see. She taught us that no act is too small to matter." One day, as Michael was going through old documents at the community center, he found an unopened letter addressed to Claire from Daniel. The envelope, yellowed with age, had been tucked away in a drawer. Michael hesitated before carefully opening it, knowing that it held a piece of their shared history. "Dear Claire, if you're reading this, it means we've come a long way from that day on the plane. I wanted to put into words what I've always felt but never quite said aloud. Your courage to change, to choose kindness when it would have been easier not to, is what started all of this. And for that, I will always be grateful. You showed me, and everyone else, that it's never too late to be better. Thank you for being that light. With all my gratitude. Daniel." Michael shared the letter during the next community gathering, reading it aloud to an audience that listened with rapt attention. It was a reminder of the bond that had sparked a movement and the lasting impact of their choices. The monument, now a central fixture in the city square, became a place where people gathered to reflect, celebrate, and share their stories. Annual festivals were held there, bringing together artists, musicians, and speakers who all shared the common belief that kindness could change the world. At one such festival, Maria, now an ambassador for kindness initiatives, met a delegation from another country that wanted to partner with Bridges of Kindness. The collaboration led to international workshops, exchange programs, and a global network of people committed to spreading Claire's vision. Even decades after her passing, Claire's legacy continued to inspire new waves of compassion. Stories of her journey were translated into different languages, her teachings adapted to fit various cultures, and her story taught in classrooms far beyond the borders of her hometown. Claire's great-grandchildren grew up surrounded by her legacy. They played under the shade of the monument, attended events at the community center, and learned about kindness as naturally as they learned to walk and talk. One of them, a boy named Thomas, loved listening to stories about his great-grandmother. One evening, as the family gathered for a meal, Thomas asked, "Will I ever be as kind as Grandma Claire?" His father smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You already are, Thomas, and as long as you keep choosing kindness, you'll be just like her." Claire's story became not just history, but a living part of the family, a reminder that kindness was an inheritance passed down through generations. The world continued to change and evolve, but the essence of Claire's message remained timeless. Bridges of Kindness expanded into a global foundation with ambassadors in every continent, each carrying the torch of compassion. On what would have been Claire's 100th birthday, people from all over the world sent messages to the foundation, sharing how her story had inspired them. They sent photos of their own bridges, acts of kindness, community projects, and heartfelt moments. The final message on the foundation's social media post read, "Claire's story is proof that even the smallest moments can create echoes that last forever. Choose kindness and be part of that echo." As the sun set on that special day, The monument in the city square cast a long shadow, a silent guardian of the story it represented. And though Claire was no longer there in body, her spirit lived on in every act of compassion, every smile exchanged between strangers, and every person who believed that one moment, one choice, could indeed change everything. As the decades turned into centuries, the story of Claire and Bridges of Kindness became legend. The community center in her hometown evolved into an educational hub, a place where leaders, teachers, and dreamers came to learn about the power of empathy and the strength of human connection. The annual Kindness Festival became a global celebration, where cities lit up with art, music, and stories that echoed Claire's timeless message. Claire's great-grandchildren, now adults with children of their own, continued to share stories of their beloved matriarch. They spoke of her choice on that flight, a decision that changed countless lives and ignited movements across the world. One final tribute came when Claire's story was turned into a global film that captured the simplicity and profundity of her journey. The film ended not with a grand moment, but with Claire sitting in her garden, looking up at the sky with peaceful eyes, a smile on her lips, as if she knew that what she had started would never truly end. The monument, now known as the Bridge of Claire, stood tall and proud in the city center. Visitors from every corner of the globe would come to touch its base, tracing their fingers over the inscription, "One moment, one choice, endless ripples." Stories shared at its base continued to multiply, turning the monument into a living symbol of hope and unity. Daniel's final years were spent traveling and sharing Claire's story, reminding people of the power of a single choice. When he passed, it was said that he went peacefully, with the same serene smile that he always carried when speaking of Claire. But even as those who began the movement departed, their influence lived on. Kindness became a universal language spoken by people everywhere, transcending boundaries and generations. The Bridges of Kindness Foundation expanded to include scholarships, humanitarian aid, and environmental efforts, all rooted in the belief that a compassionate heart can change the world. On the 150th anniversary of Bridges of Kindness, a child stood with her parents at the Bridge of Claire. She looked up at her mother and asked, "Why is everyone here so happy?" Her mother smiled, kneeling to meet her eyes. Because a long time ago, someone made a choice to be kind, and that kindness never stopped spreading. And so, the story continued, an unending chain of compassion, reminding the world that even in the smallest moments, the light of kindness can shine forever. Claire's journey was not just one of personal transformation, but a story that became part of the collective spirit of humanity, a testament that one act, one person, one choice, could truly create ripples that would last for generations to come. The story of Claire is a powerful reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can ignite monumental change. What began as a moment of discomfort on a plane blossomed into a movement that spanned generations and continents. Claire's decision to challenge her own beliefs and choose compassion transformed not only her life, but the lives of countless others. Through her journey, we see that true strength lies in the courage to change and the humility to connect with others, regardless of differences. Bridges of Kindness became more than just a community center. It evolved into a symbol of hope, a testament to the enduring power of empathy. Claire's legacy was carried forward by those who believed in her vision, proving that the simplest of choices can lead to the most profound impacts. As her story continued to echo through generations, it served as a beacon for people everywhere, teaching that kindness is not just an act, but a way of life, a choice that, when embraced, has the power to shape the world. Claire's life exemplified that in a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, kindness can bridge any gap and create ripples that last forever. In the end, Claire's journey is a universal message to us all, that we each have the power to be that moment, that choice, that change. And when we choose kindness, we build bridges that connect us all. If Claire's story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the power of your own choices. Remember, it only takes one act of kindness to create ripples that can change the world. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of compassion. Leave a comment with a story of kindness you've witnessed or experienced. I'd love to hear how a simple gesture made a difference in your life. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power we hold to make the world a better place, one choice at a time. Thank you for watching, and remember, be the bridge that connects us all.